People like to ask me what I feel about this Mr. Jiang. Why? Is that a race thing? Firstly, his videos are a little too long for my taste. I don't have the attention span to watch hour-long content unless they're emotionally engaging, like, The Pit. But also, in general, I'm pretty annoyed by anyone who try to predict who's gonna win a war. I talked about this from a game theory angle, which I will keep pounding today. But first, let's clarify something even more basic. So what do you mean by winning? War is not a standard board game. So winning is very hard to define. Some people will tell you that the US military is so strong that it can defeat any country. But then some other people will tell you the US has never won a war since World War II. I'm pretty sure you all heard both statements at some point in your life, right? So how can both of these statements sound right even though they are opposite? It's because terms like victory and defeat can have wildly different interpretations. Like when you play a video game, it's easy. I used to play Overwatch. I'm pretty bad, by the way. Hard stuck at silver for years. So in a game like that, both sides have the same resources. So winning simply means you did better than the other team. It doesn't matter how many lives are lost along the way, because you respawn. Sometimes you strategically die, so you respawn with your teammates at the same time. There are no costs to war, only the result. You only have to care about how well you do compared to the other side. In a real war, the cost-benefit analysis is much trickier. If you end up better off than the other side, but worse off than you were before the war, is that a win or loss? If you are invading a country, but only manage to occupy a small part of their territory, is that a win or a loss? Say if Russia and Ukraine freeze their front line and sign a treaty right now, under international enforcement. So who should be considered the winner? You might say Russia won because they enlarged their territory. Yeah, but they also lost more than 1 million troops. Russia is not good at carrying the wounded, so their death-injury ratio is very high. Is that a win? Of course, you can say it's a win for Putin because he doesn't care about the death. He only cares about the territory. Yeah, well, but will his political power be more secure or less secure with a result like this? I have no idea. Also, for the defending side, how do you define victory? Britain after World War II was definitely worse off than before the war, right? Lots of deaths and injuries. But it was still considered a win, right? Even though it was worse off than before the war, it was better off than the alternative scenario in which they surrendered to Germany and lost their freedom. So maybe fewer British would have died in that scenario, but life would have become unbearable. So in order to define wins and losses, you have to estimate the counterfactual. And counterfactuals, by definition, are hard to estimate. I saw so many people on the internet saying Ukraine would be better off surrendering to Russia. Well, maybe there are trolls, but maybe they just sincerely believe that. Not everyone have the same estimate of the counterfactuals. I personally think if Putin had won easily, he would start drafting Ukrainians and making them fight the NATO countries. Then even more Ukrainians would die as a result. That's my belief. But that's not something I can prove because counterfactuals by definition can't be proved. In the world of physics, maybe we can. Say, if I drop this cup, it will certainly break and my cat will freak out. I know that for sure. But in the world of politics, due to a large number of confounding variables, we don't know the counterfactuals, which makes the victory and defeat very hard to define. So to summarize, there are a few different ways to define victory. The first definition, whether you're better off than the other side. According to this definition, the US military probably wins almost every time because, duh, it has bigger guns. The second definition, whether you are better off than yourself before the war. Under this definition, the US military probably loses most of the time because war is costly. Then the third definition is probably the only strategically important definition, which is whether you are better off than you would be if you choose not to fight. This is the most important question to ask, really, because it affects your strategy. But it is also the most difficult question because we don't know the counterfactuals. This is why I'm still unsure if the Iraq War should be considered a loss. I'm not sure because I can't estimate what would have happened if Saddam Hussein had stayed in power. Maybe he would just chill and stay out of the way. That'd be nice, but would he really? There's no way for any of us to know. That guy was so unpredictable, he probably didn't even know what he would do himself. And what would his two crazy boys have done if Saddam had died naturally? Would they be fighting the rebellions, or fighting another country, or fighting each other? I don't know. So don't ask me if the US won the Iraq War. I literally don't know. Now let's look at the ongoing war between the US and Iran. If we use the first definition, which side is relatively better off, of course the US has won already. At least the orange old pedo is still alive, and his Iranian counterpart was killed. So relatively, you can say the US already won. It's not quite Overwatch, but more like a pay to win. You see what I mean? The rich side has more kills. This is pretty much the Pete Hegseth argument, right? Oh, we won because we bombed the shit out of them. But if we use the second definition, both sides lost already, obviously. Both countries lost lives, and both sides are worse off economically. Maybe you could say Trump is winning personally because he raked in some support from those adrenaline junkies around the country. That's possible, but he may also lose some support over this. It's hard to say if he gains more or loses more. And similarly, the Iranian regime may be weakened by the war, but they may also gain some support due to the US bombings. Who the fuck knows? What if we use the third definition? I honestly don't know. Firstly, I don't know the counterfactuals. What would have happened if the US had not attacked? What would Israel have done? What would Iran's internal politics look like? And how long would it take them to make nukes? I don't have any of this information. Not only I don't know the counterfactuals, I don't even know the factuals given the current scenario. Will Iran's new leader be assassinated? Will there be internal political struggle in Iran? And what will US politics look like? Will Congress do something about it? Will the oil prices keep rising? And how much reserve can Western countries release? How many drones does Iran still have? And how many interceptors do the Gulf states still have? And how much production capacity does Iran still have? Like, how many new drones do they make every day? Nobody knows. Maybe some folks in the Mossad or the CIA have a rough idea, but no way that information is available to some YouTubers like Professor Jiang, okay? If he tells you he can predict what happens next, that's not much different from fortune telling. You know, fortune tellers' business model is basically predicting a bunch of stuff, and when they get something wrong, you won't remember it. And when they get something right, you're like, whoa. Now I want to reinforce this idea I talked about in that other video. So why can't we predict how exactly a war will proceed? I'll show you why with a simple proof by contradiction. Say, if we can predict exactly how a war will end, then so can the belligerents, right? No way we have more information than they do. But if the belligerents know exactly what will happen, they should be able to reach a deal immediately based on what will happen anyway, minus the body bags, right? Do you know as many as 95% of the criminal prosecutions reach a plea deal without a trial? Because both sides know exactly what the jury is going to say. They just save the trouble. So the only reason a case goes to trial is because the prosecution and the defense both have some private information which makes both sides want to take a gamble. War is more complicated than that because of the credible commitment problem, which I talked about quite a few times. You know, a peace treaty is not as easily enforceable as plea deals. But I'm pretty sure in the case of the US and Iran, it's not that much a problem. Both sides could totally sign a treaty today and immediately stop fighting for the foreseeable future. So if they know exactly what the result will be, then what's the point of spending all this money just to delay the inevitable? The only reason both sides are fighting is because the future is uncertain, and fighting may affect what the future will be. So war essentially is a gamble. Okay, so in general, I wouldn't recommend putting too much faith on war predictions.